a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. There's nothing funny about a bad cup of coffee other than the taste. I've had some coffee that was so bad it nearly made me swear off coffee. Now that's bad. I imagine there are a few folks out there whose one and only cup of Joe was a bad one and they never tried it again. If they had tried Organic Man Coffee Trike coffee, they would probably be drinking it all the time. The best coffee in the universe can be yours by going to 4501 McPherson and seeing what coffee should taste like. If it's too far, you can't get there from there. Go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Coffee gets things done, and good coffee gets good things done. Roddy Fry has sent me an email asking if I'd ever looked into circuses as being somewhat strange. This is a subject I can get behind. Some of the folks who work at circuses are kind of strange, as well as some of the people that go there to watch. Sometimes the audience is more interesting than the performance. Let's see what I can find. In ancient Rome, the word circus had a different meaning than it does today. It meant circle. The Circus Maximus was the largest public space in Rome, and when it reached its maximus, or its maximum dimensions during the first century, it could allow 250,000 people to sit in its stands. It was a racetrack for chariot racing, and it was common to see people getting killed in these performances. Sometimes, in order to be sure that the person driving the chariot wasn't working for the other guy, the owners would do all the driving and steering of the chariots, which meant if there was a bad accident, well, it was going to put that chariot business out of business. After a while, they began having gladiator events at the Circus Maximus. Joey, do you like movies about gladiators? Some of you might remember that from Airplane. The circus also held military processions for the Roman games every September for 15 days. There were wild animal hunts, which isn't much of a hunt, seeing as the animals were inside a huge walled arena. There were public executions, always a crowd pleaser. A lot of people think it's an awful thing to see. These are the same folks who watch movies with lots of sex and violence. Yes, actually watching somebody, or rather a bunch of people dying, is over the top. This was how things were back then. Live action. Yee 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 yee. During one circus event, a small army of gladiators were sent in to fight 20 elephants at the same time. There's no report on who won. The concept of freak shows dates back to the 1500s, where people with unusual physical traits were showcased at fairs and carnivals. These included human oddities, folks with congenital disabilities or unique physical traits, such as the bearded lady or the skeleton man in conjoined twins. There were exotic performers. Many were, or at least pretended to be, from distant lands, often portrayed with a sense of mystique and otherness. This category included people with unusual body modifications or those from isolated tribes. The living wonders were people with extraordinary abilities or medical conditions, such as sword swallowers, fire eaters, and contortionists. I watch contortionists and it makes my back hurt. They also had fabricated freaks. Performers would use makeup, costumes, or props to create an illusion of being a freak, such as the Ecuadorian head shrinker or the wolf man. The freak shows would sometimes link up with traveling carnivals, and this led to the name sideshow becoming popular. Vic Hermanson did a show about freaks on Trailer Trash Terrors, number 96. The anomalies of our minds are always with us, even when the carnival gates are closed. That's the name of the show. It's quite a long name. The anomalies of our minds are always with us, even when the carnival gates are closed. If you got to type that whole thing in to find it on YouTube, well, good luck. It's all about what the world has called freaks. The freak shows, their history, and how their impact on society simply cannot be dismissed. Vic says, "To be honest, I think it's one of the best shows I've ever done." No, I do not sound like Vic. Also, it's the return of Beelzebubba. I hate I hate the need to use asterisks, he says, but that's how they had to do the conversation on his platform. He said it was one of his absolute best shows, and I agree with him. It was a fantastic show. You should check it out. I am not going to mention the name again. Just look for Trailer Trash Terrors number 96. Philip Astley is known as the father of the modern circus. He was born in 1742 in Newcastle under Lyme, England. That sounds like a dish that they would serve at some fancy restaurant. For a young man of Astley's background, he had few choices on what he was going to do. He could follow in his father's trade as a cabinet maker, or he could join the military. Astley chose the military. He enlisted in the 15th Light Dragoons Cavalry Regiment at the age of 17. Astley was tall for his time, standing 6 feet. He was quite a bit taller than just about everybody else in the military. Most men in England were 5'6" at the time. Astley was a gifted horseman and he could handle a sword. This was what the army was looking for. During the 7 Years' War between Britain and France, he captured an enemy standard in one battle and he rescued the Duke of York from behind enemy lines. His true genius lay in his ability to train and communicate with horses, using a system of repetition and reward to train them to perform tricks and maneuvers. After leaving the army in 1766 with the rank of sergeant major, Astley settled in London and opened a riding school near the Westminster Bridge. In the mornings, he taught horsemanship to wealthy aristocrats. In the afternoon, he began putting on exhibitions of trick riding, vaulting, and other feats of equestrian skill to entertain the public. As more people saw what could be done on a horse, more young folks with wealthy parents wanted to join his school. Form of advertising. Astley began hiring acrobats and jugglers and other performers to fill out the show. These kinds of acts had existed for centuries at fairgrounds and marketplaces, but Astley is credited with bringing them together in one location. The evening shows became so popular they began to eclipse the training. One of Astley's signature acts was known as the Tailor of Bentford. This was a slapstick comedy routine that showcased his skill as both a rider and in physical comedy. The name slapstick originates from the Italian bataccio, or batacchio, a slap stick. It was a club like object that was composed of two wooden slats that produced a loud smacking noise when you hit somebody with it. Very little force was needed. You would smack somebody somewhere about the body, and it sounded like you were really punishing them. It, it delivered very little pain and no damage to the recipient. That's why it's called slap stick. Playing the hapless tailor, Astley would attempt to mount a horse and ride to an election, only to be thrown off again and again. The sight of Astley being outfoxed by his own steed never failed to bring down the house. In 1770, in order to accommodate his growing audience, Astley opened a permanent amphitheater near Westminster Bridge. The building's design was a circular ring surrounded by tiered seating. It had an open roof to allow for year-round performances. The size and the shape were ideal for equestrian displays, being 42 feet in diameter. This allowed riders to circle the ring while maintaining a constant speed. This layout would become the standard for circuses around the world. As word of Astley's show spread, he began to take his circus on tour. He was establishing amphitheaters in cities across Britain and Europe. By the time of his death in 1814, he had 19 permanent locations, from Dublin, Paris to Belgrade. Astley's circus was an international phenomenon, appealing to audiences across all classes. The rich and the poor would show up to watch. You didn't have to speak the language because it was all visual. Uh, Young and old, people from all walks of life wanted to see his circus, his circle. What set Astley's circus apart from earlier performers of popular entertainment was it focused on the feats of humans and animal skills. In Astley's ring, the emphasis was always on the partnership between horse and rider, the grace and power of the human body in motion. He didn't have exotic animals or clowns. The slapstick performances were done as a part of the show without being separate. What looked like a riding performance might turn into a laugh spectacle. Astley knew how to give the audiences what they wanted. During the Napoleonic Wars, Astley staged elaborate reenactments of British military victories, complete with cannon fire and hundreds of extras in uniform. I'll bet that was a hit in France. Astley believed in the power of the circus to bring people together and uplift their spirits. He was known for his generosity and charity work, often giving away free tickets to orphans and the poor. He was a master at marketing his shows and wholesome family entertainment with something to delight and amaze everyone. I don't much care for clowns. Coulrophobia is the irrational fear of clowns, which can cause panic and nausea. It's a rare phobia, but many people find clowns to be creepy or downright scary. Some associate clowns with ideas such as laughing on the outside while crying on the inside. To me, clowns seem to represent fakes, like politicians who show one side of themselves while hiding behind a mask of decency and being involved in all manners of evil. Clowns have appeared in most cultures throughout history. The earliest documented clowns go back to ancient Egypt, sometime around 2500 to 2400 BC. Clowns were also around in ancient Greek and Roman societies. They had the traditional they had traditionally served as a socio-religious and psychological role. And traditionally the roles of priests and clowns were held by the same people. You could literally say your priest is a clown, and that would be a compliment. The term clown has been extended to jesters and fools, characteristics in non Western culture. A society in which clowns have an important position are termed clown societies, and a clown character involved in a religious or ritual capacity is known as a ritual clown. The clown character developed out of a rustic fool character or the early modern commedia dell'arte, which were themselves directly based on rustic fool characters of ancient Greece and Rome theater. Rustic buffoon characters in classic Greek theater were known as skleropytes, or to play like a child. In Roman theater, a term for a clown was a fossor, literally a digger or a laborer, the lower classes, if you will. During the Middle Ages in Europe, the clown figure evolved into the court jester, a role that allowed for a surprising amount of influence and power, as jesters could express truth and critique without fear of retribution, thanks to their position as entertainers. They were the only ones that could tell the king that he had an ugly daughter and nothing would happen about it. The jesters, with their iconic attire and freedom to mock, led much of the groundwork for modern clowns, weaving political commentary and social satire into their performances. The English word clown was first recorded in 1560 as clone or cloyne, with the generic meaning rustic, boor, or peasant. The origin of the word may come from Scandinavian word for clumsy. The word clown is used as the name of fool characters in Shakespeare's Othello and The Winter's Tale. The sense of clown as referring to the professional or the habitual fool or jester developed sometime around 1600 based on Elizabethan rustic fool characters. Keep making up words that don't exist. The harlequin developed in England in the 17th century, and it was inspired by Arlecchino and the Commedia dell'arte once again. A clown came into use as the given name of the stock character. The clown was opposite of the harlequin's slyness and skillful nature. The harlequin was not a clown, and the clown was not a harlequin. They were opposites of each other. Clown was a buffoon or a bumpkin who resembled less a jester than a comedic idiot. He was a lower class character dressed in tattered servant's garb. Poor folks were clowns, while the aristocrats were the clever uh, harlequins. The new classical features New? How about the now? The now classical features of the clown character were developed in the early 1800s by Joseph Grimaldi, who played the clown in Charles Dibbens' 1800 pantomime, Peter Wilkins, or Harlequin in the Flying World at Sadler's Wells Theater. Why do they have to use such darn long names? Grimaldi built the character up into the central figure of the play. In the early 20th century, with the disappearance of the rustic simpleton or the village idiot, all of our village idiots seem to have gotten into politics. North American circuses developed characters such as the tramp or the hobo. Marceline Orbis performed at the Hippodrome Theater. Charles Chaplin, who portrayed the tramp. Emmett Kelly's Wary Willie, based on hobos of the Depression era. Another influential tramp character was played by Otto Dribbling during the 1930s to 50s. Even Red Skeleton played the clown in a movie called The Clown, depicting the circus clown as a tragic comedic stock character, a funny man with a drinking problem. Many native tribes have a history of clowning, such as the Pueblo clown of the Kachina culture. A Hayaka is an individual in Lakota and Dakota culture who lives outside the constraints of normal cultural roles, playing the role of a backwards clown by doing everything in reverse. If you saw the movie Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman, they had one of these characters in the movie. He would take a bath and then throw dirt on himself. Canadian First Nations feature jester like ritual performers. The exact nature of their role is kept secret from non members of the tribe. My big question when dealing with clowns is always what are they hiding behind all that makeup? That false smile that could be hiding a killer. The I can't think of the name of the song right now, but the song by the Moody Blues. No, no, not gonna bruise my brain trying to remember it. John Wayne Gacy lived from March 17th, 1942 until May 10th, 1994, when he was the guest of honor at an execution. He was an American serial killer and sex offender who raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys in Norwood Park Township, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. He became known as the Killer Clown due to his public performances as a clown prior to his discovery. May 26th, 1990, in Wellington, Florida, at 10:45 a.m. on a Saturday, Marlene Warner answered her front door to find somebody dressed as a clown. The person was wearing an orange wig, a red bulb nose, white face paint, and a clown outfit, holding a handful of balloons and flowers. The clown handed her these items, then pulled a .38 revolver and shot Warren point blank in the face as her son and his friends watched on in horror. Warren collapsed in the doorway of her Wellington home, blood spewing from her head wound. You never seen a gunshot to a head wound. Whew, they're a mess. One of the balloons in the bouquet read, "You're the greatest." The clown calmly walked back to a white Chrysler LeBaron and drove away. It wasn't until 2017 that police managed to arrest Sheila Keene Warren who had married Marlene's widower, Michael Warren. DNA evidence from hair fibers found in the getaway car and a witness testimony said that Sheila had purchased a clown costume days before the murder. Sheila had worked for Michael's car rental agency, and she was having an affair with him while he was still married to Marlene. In Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, October 18th, 2013, Francisco Rafael Arellano Felix, the former leader of the Tijuana cartel, was celebrating with family members at a luxury beach resort. Several entertainers performed during the children's portion of the event, including a clown known professionally as Kikin. As Arellano Felix watched the performance, Kikin approached him. Without breaking character or removing his clown makeup, Kikin pulled out a pistol and fired 2 shots into Arellano Felix's head, killing him instantly in front of his friends and family. The killer escaped through an emergency exit. Mexican authorities determined the murder was orchestrated by rival gang members seeking to eliminate Arellano Felix. The killer clown was never found. During the late 19th and early 20th century, freak shows were at their height of popularity. From 1840 to 1940 saw the organized for-profit exhibition of people with physical, mental, or behavioral rarities. Not all abnormally, not a, no, blah, blah, blah. I'm listening to my cat over there meowing out the door. Not all abnormalities were real. Some were just a lot of makeup, or having 2 people, usually women, harnessed together. Prosthetics were attached to make a performer look as if he had an extra leg. The performers had to take steps to never appear in public or wear a disguise during their onstage life. The attractiveness of freak shows led to the spread of the shows that were commonly seen at amusement parks, circuses, dime museums, and the vaudeville. P.T. Barnum was considered the father of modern-day advertising and one of the most famous showmen and managers of freak show industry. In the United States, he was a major figure in popularizing this kind of entertainment. It was common for Barnum's acts to be schemes and not altogether true. The Fiji mermaid was a monkey-fish composite. Barnum spent years collecting specimens, artifacts, and displays. His main passion was showmanship and entertainment rather than scientific education. Barnum was fully aware of the improper ethics behind his business, and he said, "I don't believe in duping the public, but I believe in first attracting and then pleasing them." Most people have heard Barnum say, "There's a sucker born every minute." But this is not considered to be actually what he said. The saying probably came from David Hanman, who was referring to one of Barnum's exhibits. Barnum's English counterpart was Tom Norman, a renowned Victorian showman whose traveling exhibits featured Eliza Jenkins, the skeleton woman, a balloon-headed baby, and a woman who bit the heads off of live rats. This is known as a geek show, which were an act in traveling carnivals and circuses and were often a part of the larger sideshows. The billed performers' acts consisted of a single geek who stood in the center ring and then would chase live chickens around. It would end with the geek biting the heads off the chickens and swallowing them. The geek shows were often used as openers for the freak shows. It was a matter of pride among circus and carnival professionals to have never traveled with a troupe that included geeks. Geeks were often alcoholics or drug addicts and paid with liquor, especially during Prohibition, or sometimes paid with narcotics. Nightmare Alley, the 1947 movie starring Tyrone Power. Power is a carnival barker who wants to learn the secret code used by mentalists. Xena and her husband used to do a stage act where she would help with her husband, who would hold up a blindfold. Let me get that straight. Xena would hold up a object out in the audience, and her husband, wearing a blindfold, would be able to see what she was holding up. It was all in the words that she used that would allow him to figure out what she was holding. It was all in a code. Zena's husband was working as a geek in the circus due to way too much alcohol in his diet. He had what is known as a wet brain. By the end of the movie, Power is reduced to drinking his way through life and eating live chickens. This has nothing to do with what we know today as the Geek Squad, those folks that keep all my computers working. I must say, thank God for the Geek Squad. They have bailed me out so many times. We have uh, an ongoing subscription with them, and they see me way too much. Other acts in Tom Norman's sideshow included fleas. Yes, those tiny biting bugs. I'll get to more about them in a bit. Norman had a prerequisite fat lady, a giant, dwarves, and a retired white seaman who had been painted all black, and he would speak an invented language, being billed as a savage Zulu. There was a family of midgets, which in reality was two men and a borrowed baby. He operated a number of shops in London and Nottingham and exhibited traveling shows throughout the country. Fleas, those blood-sucking bugs that I am constantly trying to keep off of George. Yes, those things. In 1570, a London blacksmith named Mark Shallett became the first person to enslave a flea to do advertising for his business. To show off his craftsmanship, Tom created a tiny gold chain that he affixed to a flea. The smith gained fame from his public relations feat and inspired others to take up the flea-powered phenomenon. In 1820, Louis Bortolotto, an Italian living in London, proclaimed that his new act was an extraordinary exhibition of industrious fleas. This led to the creation of the flea circus. In early 1900s, William Heckler called his fleas skilled professionals as they juggled, raced, and boxed on a tiny stage. He named his favorite fleas, and he said they would respond to voice commands. In a good day of performances, his little circus would bring in more than $250 in admittance fees, which is in today's currency about $3,000. Talk about a flea show. I keep working my way back to freaks. I wonder why. Probably because they're so anomalous. Some freaks are downright bizarre. Laws in the United States, starting in about 1860, banned those who were diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed from public view. making it hard for such people to support themselves. Exhibitions were accepted from this law. Exempted, not accepted. They were exempted from the law. Freak shows were viewed as a place for entertainment. They were also a place of employment for those that could perform in these attractions. Before social safety nets or workers' compensation, severely disabled people found themselves at a loss. The only opportunity they had to make a living was to perform. In the 19th century, performing in an organized freak show was perceived as a viable way of earning a living, as opposed to begging. Many freak shows performers were lucky and gifted enough to earn a livelihood and have good life through exhibitions. Some became celebrities, commanding high salaries and earning far more than acrobats, novelty performers, and actors. The salaries of dime museum freaks usually varied from 25 to $500 a week, and this is back in the 19th century, making more money than lecture room variety performers. At the height of freak show popularity, they were one of the few jobs open to dwarves. Changing attitudes about physical differences led to the decline of the freak shows as a form of entertainment towards the end of the 19th century. The folks who, until that time, had been making a good living now found themselves out of work. Yes, there was exploitation, but there was also a lot of camaraderie among the performers. They were stars to many, and they were celebrities. The do gooders, who are almost always on the wrong side of every argument, proclaimed freak shows were taboo, and all those freaks had to find some other way of earning a living. Not a single one of those do gooders offered to hire the freaks or help them find a new job. You can't perform in front of an audience, but don't ask me for help. That kind of thing. In the years following the Civil War, a new form of human exploitation arose: human zoos. And traveling sideshows began to pop up everywhere. Instead of animals in cages, they had people, not necessarily in cages, but on display. These folks didn't have any kind of physical anomaly, they just looked different. All across Europe and the United States, traveling performers would display folks dressed like what the owners thought they should look like. There were small huts and clothing that may or may not have been what the people on display had used while in their native homes. Europeans and Americans who had never traveled around the world had heard stories of people who had unusual shaped eyes. Well, unusual for Europeans and Americans. The people with black skin were well known to most folks, but put a grass skirt and some bones and a necklace around their neck, and now you've got something to look at. The first human zoos were opened in 1874 by an exotic animal trainer named Carl Hockenbeck. Hagenbeck had displayed animals from far-flung regions of the world in his traveling show as a way to introduce regular people to exotic wildlife. People who had never seen a lion were willing to pay to see one of these giant cats in a very small cage. This brings to mind the Sumatran rat monkey. What, you never heard of this wild creature? It can be seen in the movie Dead Alive, directed by Peter Jackson. Yes, the Lord of the Rings guy. It was one of his earlier movies. During the height of the Industrial Revolution, people were beginning to accumulate a bit of money, and they were willing to spend it on something new and bizarre. There were few places of interest a family could visit. When word got out there was a traveling sideshow in town, everybody went to see what they had. Carl Hagenbeck was taking a lot of money in a few coins at a time. He thought if folks are willing to pay a small amount to see a weird looking animal, what would they pay to see weird looking people? Hagenbeck grew up at a time and a place where racism was the norm. Nobody was worried about how somebody from far off land might feel about being put on display and gawked at. Africans were just a couple of rungs above animals on the hierarchy of humanity. A show full of humans would be like his previous show, but even more exhilarating. Carl Hagenbeck was not the first European to exploit foreign cultures and people by putting them on display. For centuries, European explorers would take native folks who they found in the New World or Africa back with them to Europe to show off to the folks there. What Carl Hagenbeck did was take an old practice of kidnapping and exploitation and turn it into a profitable industry. During the early 1900s in Germany, people shows attracted large gatherings and spectators. They were interested in getting a glimpse of an exotic person without having to travel. Just about every country in Europe was looking to get in on this action. If Hagenbeck can make a ton of money putting on a few subhumans on display, then why can't we? As the demand for exotic humans got going, the people supplying these display figures needed to find more and interesting people. In the United States, from Philadelphia to San Francisco to New York, human exhibits were put on, and they were very popular, not to mention profitable. In 1896, the Cincinnati Zoo had an exhibit of Sioux Indians that made them $25,000 in 3 months. The zoo made the money, not the Indians. They got far less than minimum wage, which there wasn't one at the time. The largest gatherings of spectators occurred at the World's Fair. In Paris in 1889, 28 million people passed through the exhibits, one of which was a group of 400 indigenous people from various parts of the world. When somebody says indigenous people, most folks think of Indians or people who grew up somewhere before the Europeans arrived. People exhibiting or existing in a land from the earliest times or from before the arrival of the colonists. The inclusion of indigenous people in the World's Fair was something that would be repeated at all subsequent large fairs. As late as 1958, the World's Fair in Belgium, millions of people went to see an exhibit filled with people from exotic races. Belgium was one of the countries where human zoos flourished. During King Leopold's 50-year reign from 1865 to 1909, thousands of people from the Congo, which was a Belgian colony, were taken back to Belgium in propaganda tools for the king's empire building project. By exhibiting Congolese people, King Leopold hoped to spark interest in his Belgian colony and gain more support from the public. What most folks didn't know was the people living in the Congo were being treated far worse than animals. Things were being done to them that would eventually come to light. The people forced to work in these human shows were not all that happy. Maybe the ones from the Congo were, since as long as they were on display, nobody was chopping off any hands. The folks in these shows were not allowed to go sightseeing or move around outside of the fairgrounds. They had to put on their costumes and perform for the visitors, or else. The people running the shows had total control over every aspect of their life. Who is going to pay to see somebody from Asia if you can run into them at the grocery store anytime? Theodore Wanja Michael was a year old when his mom died. His folks were from Cameroon, and the courts decided that his old man wasn't capable of caring for Theodore and his three siblings. Each of them was sent to a traveling fair to be taken care of. Theodore was forced to work in an exhibit in which he was dressed in a raffia skirt and pretended to be a wild African boy. The audience was expecting a wild creature, and the owner of the sideshow did what he wanted to appease them. Oddly enough, Theodore managed to survive growing up. He managed to survive the Nazis after being sent to a concentration camp, and during the Cold War, he became a spy for the Allies. Human zoos were oppressive environments. People pushed up against the barriers, separating them from the exhibitions. They jeered and heckled at the performers. They didn't hesitate in showing their displeasure when they didn't get what they wanted. In November 1881, at an exhibit in Berlin, a massive mob of visitors was denied the opportunity to see a group of indigenous people who had decided to stay in their hut. Enraged, the crowd pressed up against the enclosure and destroyed fences and other barriers in their attempt to interact with the subjects in the exhibit. For the people trapped inside the exhibit, the reaction of the crowd must have been somewhat terrifying. Many indigenous folks were lured to Europe with false promises of good pay and easy conditions, only to realize, too late, that they'd made a mistake, and they were now stuck performing for some profit hungry entrepreneurs. A group of 8 Inuit who were placed on exhibit in Berlin found themselves constantly being scrutinized by onlookers. The crowd would look at them as if nothing happened, yet the crowd would look at them, and if nothing happened, they would begin yelling and throwing things at them. After only a few months, the Inuit began to get sick and slowly, one by one, died from smallpox. Many human zoos closed down after World War I. This was partially because the survivors began to integrate into society and could no longer be forced into such miserable working conditions. World's fairs and zoos continued to include humans as part of their exhibits for decades. As recently as 2005, in Augsburg, Germany, a celebration of African culture known as African Village was a festival held in the center of the city's zoo. The event's organizers saw nothing wrong with holding the festival next to the monkey cages in the Savannah exhibit. Many others took offense. Some people were so upset they threatened to burn the zoo down. I am not into circuses. It's just not my thing, but I have been to a few because of the people I was with. One day, back when it was still sort of safe to go to Mexico, we went to a circus in Nuevo Laredo. To begin with, there was no such thing as safety inspectors. The bleachers looked as if they had survived the Civil War. You had to sit real still to avoid splinters. Right in the middle of the show, the popcorn machine that was right next to the main ring caught fire. There it sat blazing away while the show continued. The show must go on. Most of the audience just ignored the flames. I was thinking about the Great Circus Fire, a circus fire that occurred July 6th, 1944 in Hartford, Connecticut, killed at least 167 people and injured 700 more. There we were in a huge tent covered in waterproofing that was probably flammable, and nobody seemed worried about this bonfire going on. The exit was on the far side of the ring, and the place was packed. I guess we survived. The fire went out as soon as it had burned up all the oil and corn. Now the tent was filled with that mouth-watering aroma of burning popcorn. Most circuses have just the one ring, and everything happens right there. In a three-ring circus, there is stuff going on in front of you, but also to the left and the right. Why, you may ask? You see everything at the single ring, and then you're finished. There's no reason to go back the next night. In a three-ring circus, you catch action going on to your left, to your right, and right in front of you. You begin wondering, what are you missing? So you feel the urge to go back multiple times so you can catch the whole show. It's a tricky way of creating repeat business. Circuses have changed over the years. It went from a kind of a grungy thing that popped up on the edge of town to the thing it is today. In Baie St. Paul, Quebec, during 1980s, a group of performers entertained their audiences by juggling, dancing, breathing fire, and playing music. Among those performers was a man named Guy La Liberté. I hope I got that right. As a child, La Liberté was taken to see the Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus, and he fell in love with it. 1982, La Liberté participated with other performers in the holiday fair known as the Baie St. Paul Fête Foraine. No, I do not speak French. And this would be the start of his dream to create the Cirque du Soleil. They came to Laredo a while back. It was quite a show. I paid extra so we could sit in the front row and get pelted by drops of sweat flying off of the performers. Well, actually, I did pay extra to get up close to the stage so we could see everything, and we did get to see everything. It was nothing like the circus in Mexico. There was no fire. It was inside an arena where it was air conditioned. Oh, and the arena just happened to be haunted. But that's another story. A carnival is different from a circus. In a circus, you sit and you watch the performances as they pass in front of you. In a carnival, you move around to see the action. Now, there are carnivals and there is the carnival. A carnival is that's not how it's pronounced, I know. I don't pronounce it correctly, but that's the way we say it here in the US. Carnival. Carnival is a festive season that occurs at the close of the Christian pre-Lent period, consisting of Shrove Sunday, Shrove Monday, and Shrove Tuesday, or Mardi Gras, which is also known as Fat Tuesday. You get to act as if sin doesn't matter because you're going to repent soon on Ash Wednesday. This sounds way outside of anything Jesus ever told us to do, but that's also another show. Carnival typically involves public celebration, including events such as parades, public street parties, which sometimes lead to public street fights, and other entertainment. Those beads that everybody seems to obtain while in New Orleans, well, they get those beads by showing off a part of the anatomy that men don't usually have, and some women have way too much of. Somebody yells, "Show me your," and then they throw them some beads. Elaborate costumes and masks allow people to set aside their everyday individuality and experience a heightened sense of social unity. They also get to behave like a bunch of baboons because nobody can recognize them. The more alcohol they consume, the more ape like they become. It allows people to release their inner demons and act as if Judgment Day will never come. Participants often indulge in excessive consumption of alcohol, which also leads to jail time and hangovers. Eating as much meat as possible so they can make up for the coming weeks of vegetables and other food that will be foregone during the coming Lent. I've never been to New Orleans during Mardi Gras. I don't like crowds and I don't drink anymore. Yes, that was another show also. A lot of guys I used to work with would pack their bags and sally forth to attend the big event. As many as 10 of them would rent one hotel room and then try to stay out of jail. Many would return with stories of sights, sounds, and encounters. Others would come back with a total lack of memory, having drunk themselves into a stupor and not sobered up until they got back home. Now that's fun. What'd you do in Mardi Gras? Well, I got so drunk I can't remember anything that happened. Wow, and that only cost you a couple $1,000, huh? Really, a few of my coworkers had no memory from immediately after the plane landed in New Orleans. Some people actually go to New Orleans to watch the parades, the floats as they rumble by. The origins of these mobile sites wasn't to have people dancing, singing, and throwing beads at topless women. The floats were used to depict scenes from the Bible. Few people could read, so the church would have folks dress up like a diorama in Jesus and the Smokies. What? You've never been to Gatlinburg? Too bad for you. There is a museum in Gatlinburg. It is called Jesus in the Smokies. And if you ever get a chance to see it, it is memorable. It is something else. I should have taken more pictures, but I think there's a sign that said no photography allowed, but it's quite cool. And the people there are very nice. The church folks would assemble wagons and they would place actors dressed like Bible figures and they would pull them through small towns all along the Gulf Coast. And now it's time to test people's offensive level. The Gulf of America. Did you get mad? Think about it. This set of continents was called the Americas long before Mexico became a country. In August 24th, 1821, Mexico broke away from Spain. In 2025, some folks, beginning with our president, began calling it the Gulf of America, and folks lost their minds. The same folks who wanted to rename every sports club and military base in our country said it was wrong to rename the Gulf of Mexico. If your biggest anxiety is the name of a body of water, you need to re examine your priorities. There are bigger problems out there that could use your attention. Venice supplanted Rome as the main site of Italian carnival festivities by the 18th century. Like many later carnival celebrations, Venice's affairs were marked by a widespread use of masks, which created a temporary feeling of equality between the ruling classes and the lower classes. The 6-week festival served as a placebo against the bad mood and tensions that were often generated within the poor classes towards the political system. In Brazil, festival is a huge street performance where folks dance in parades to be judged on how well they can move while on the move. When Rio de Janeiro brought back its carnival in 2023 after the 2 years of cancellations that were brought on by the Black Plague of 2020, the event made headlines around the world as to just how big of an event it was. Acclaimed as the world's biggest carnival, the 5 day celebration draws 2 million revelers each day. The celebrants take to the streets and clubs known as samba schools, parade through the city during performances. The festival's roots lie in the Portuguese colonization of Brazil. Though the Portuguese likely imported a tradition with the same Christian and ancient roots as the Roman carnival, it was the indigenous cultures of Brazil, as well as the enslaved African people brought to the colony by the Portuguese, that made the celebration what it is today. This influence is evident in Rio Carnival's samba music, feathered costumes, and dancing styles. 1941, Orson Welles was dispatched to Brazil to film scenes from Carnival uh, for a movie that he was making. Welles was under pressure from RKO to shoot a portion of his third film that was called It's All True in Brazil. He had been appointed a goodwill ambassador to Latin America by Nelson Rockefeller, who was the coordinator of the Inter American Affairs and a major stockholder in RKO. If the name RKO is a mystery to some of y'all, they used to make a whole lot of movies back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they made a lot of really bad monster movies that I watched when I was growing up. To begin with, during one of the shots, the raft being filmed flipped over and the main character was killed. It's pretty bad when your lead actor dies on the set. Kind of like in Plan 9 from Outer Space, where Bela Lugosi died halfway through the filming. Oops. Anyway, once the main character had been killed in an accident, they had to replace him with another main character. So now you've got two main characters that are never seen together. When the film footage began showing up in Hollywood, the executives were shocked to see there were no white folks in any of the footage. Why are there only black and brown people dancing in the streets? They wanted Wells to find some white folks and get them to dance. In Brazil, in the 1940s. The actors being depicted in the movie were just ordinary, hardworking folks. The executives in Hollywood wanted some Hollywood types, shallow film stars, to have the lead roles. Wells and RKO parted ways shortly thereafter. There are a few state fairs where you can see all manner of bizarre creatures and some weird exhibits as well. I have been to a few state fairs, Wisconsin, Virginia, and Texas. Still not my thing, but the folks I'm with want to go, so be it. You see all kinds of things, some of which you wish you hadn't. You get to eat all kinds of things, mostly fried and shoved on a stick. I never go on the rides. The guys who put these together look kind of questionable, as well does their work. My wife used to like to go to the September festival in Nuevo Laredo. One time I ran into a couple of guys that I had arrested. They saw me and they turned and ran. Well, then they realized I was in their country. This led to their becoming somewhat braver. Let's just say I did not get beat up, and I didn't make them cry. But they realized, well, they went away. We don't go down there anymore. It's just gotten too dangerous. The Paranormal Circus is a unique performing arts spectacular that exists somewhere between circus entertainment and cabaret. The show, which requires attendees to be 13 years or older, is the latest creation of the Circus Italia, a company that has 3 tours of paranormal circus running at the same time. The circus experience combines aerial work with contortionists, acrobatics, and a horror theme. The horror takeoff for the evening, with many characters dripping with blood, donning scary masks, and doing what almost looks like murder on stage. There's even a horror maze that you have to go through in order to get to the circus tent proper. Paranormal Circus is that rare circus event that comes with an age restriction and a disclaimer. We're not responsible if you have a heart attack. The youngsters are meant to stay at home while the adults get to enjoy a thrilling night out. Teenagers are allowed in, but only with a guardian. Yes, it came to Laredo, and yes, I didn't go. Like I said, I'm not into crowds, and my wife refuses to go, so I stay home and watch TV instead. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, spread it around. Share it with people. Send it to them on Facebook or YouTube or Rumble or whatever you happen to be watching that I'm on. Share the heck out of it. Let others know they should be watching Strange Things with Chris James. If you actually enjoyed this show and you'd like to hear all of the past shows, you can find them at iHeartRadio in the podcast section. But you have to type out the whole name because there's at least 45 other podcasts with strange things in the title. You can also find 99.8% of my shows on YouTube. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.